Welcome, everyone, to this HJI webinar. We have an exciting and a very important and timely topic. This evening's topic is entitled Religion in Korea and the Epic Story of the Chosen Han People. And as we carry on this webinar, in the minds and hearts of many of us, we think of Holy Mother Han, who is currently incarcerated and at this time hospitalized for rehabilitation of injury incurred during incarceration. And we pray for her and dedicate this evening to her and her hoped for soon to be released from this travesty. And very happy that we have with us this evening as our presenter, Dr. Thomas Selover. He's an adjunct professor on the faculty of HJI. In the fall semester, he taught a course here on this topic, and some of the students that I spoke to spoke very highly of their experience and what they gained through that course. So we felt let's have a webinar so a wider population of people can hear from Dr. Selover. I know I am looking forward to hearing his presentation. We will have time for Q&A after about 35 minutes into the program once Dr. Selover starts speaking. So please put your comments and questions in the chat column, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Many of us know Dr. Selover, but in the interest of those who do not know him well, I'd like to say a little bit about his background. He's the former president and an associate professor of the Sunhak UP Graduate University based in South Korea. And now he's currently serving as the president of the Professors World Peace Academy International and as a member of the National Educational Advisory Team of FFWPU USA. Dr. Selover's taught at universities and colleges in the US, Canada, China, and South Korea, including as associate professor and department head of religious studies at the University of Saskatchewan, Canada. His courses have ranged from topics such as world religions and methodology in the study of religion to Confucian and Taoist thought, to True Parents theology, and Chunoguk ecumenism. Dr. Selover was trained in Confucian studies by Harvard professor Dewey Ming and continues to have research interests in the intersection of unification theology with Asian philosophy, religion, and culture. He and his wife, Dr. Grace Selover, have 2 sons and 2 grandsons and are actively involved in the Peace Starts With Me movement, led by the Mother of Peace, Dr. Park Jahan. With pleasure, I invite Dr. Thomas Selover to begin his presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Walsh. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to share some thoughts and reflections about the Korean epic with HJI colleagues and graduates, students, and friends. So from my point of view, this presentation is a work in progress. I really welcome your questions and comments, suggestions as well. So let me begin. Let's do this. Okay. Okay. So religion in Korea and the epic story of the chosen Han people. So let me begin with a quotation from Dr. Hak Jahan, True Mother, in relationship to it. The Heavenly Parent chose the Korean people, the Korean Han people. That is why I thought it was necessary to create and show the epic history of the chosen Han people of Korea, to show that they are a people accompanied by God. Compared to the time of Jesus, there is much more evidence that God was with this people. So that's the framework that True Mother is definitely the guiding hand for the formation of this Korean epic story. And we've had a chance to hear from those professors from Sun Moon University and Sunhak Graduate School who actually worked on the text and the way that True Mother guided them step by step. So it's very much what she wants us to be aware of and to enjoy and to be proud of, I can put it that way. So I like this phrasing, accompanied by God. It's an intriguing thing. And so the question that in my mind, and a question for us to think about, is how is it the case? How has it been the case that Heavenly Parent, has guided this development of the Han people of Korea in a situation where, until the arrival of Christianity in full flower in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, until then, the Korean people were guided by, basically, we could say, non-theistic traditions. So that's an interesting topic, I think, for us to think about. Okay, this is the menu: the roots of a culture of attendance, Korean religion and culture resonating with heaven, Christianity and the Korean independence movement, the only begotten daughter, the returning Messiah, and the holy wedding, and then towards a heavenly unified world. So let me begin with this roots of culture of attendance. And so the main topic here is myths, mottos, and motifs. One of the interesting things that True Mother gave as a guidance to those working on the epic was that they needed to have mythic imagination. And I think that's also important for us who are learning from the epic to appreciate what is mythic imagination, and that truth can come strongly in the form of images. And that's what we're about to see. So the kind of founding myth and story of the Han people of Korea is the story of Dangun, which I'll relate just very briefly, as here on the slide. The legend relates, first of all, Hwan-ung is a divine son of Hwan-in, the creative source of the universe. So Hwan-ung came down from heaven. He received permission to come down to earth. And in that context, and to order many things, in that context, he received a petition from a bear and a tiger, who both wanted to become human, which is a kind of audacious thing for them to want to be. It's not all that easy to be human. So Hwan-ung gave them a recipe, sacred mugwort and cloves of garlic, saying, if you eat only these and avoid sunlight for 100 days, being in a cave, then you will become human. Now, along the way, the tiger gave up, but the bear thus transformed into a woman who married Hwan-ung, who had temporarily become human. So that's quite possible in this mythic, imaginatory world, legendary world. And their son was Dangun Wangun. So he is understood to be the founding king of this lineage of Han people of Korea. So what's important about this story, I think, is two things. One, the legend embodies the concept of Chunsun, descendants of heaven. It doesn't necessarily mean descending from heaven from the sky, but lineal descendants of heaven in some way or other. The other thing is Dangun became a symbol of the Korean people's vision to create a universal peace desired by all humanity under the spirit of these four words. Hongik Ingan, actually two words, or three, depending on how you divide it up in English, widely benefiting humankind, Hongik Ingan, which has become a motto in Korean culture and in Korean education. To be blessed to be a blessing for not only your own people, but also for all of humankind. So this is something seeded in this Korean Han tradition, which we'll see later surfaces again and again in terms of a noble ideal of what the people are all about and what their hope is. So Mother says, even before Christ, the Dong-i people, the Korean people, established the Han kingdom. They revered heaven and were knowledgeable about astronomy. So there's a little bit of debate between Koreans and Chinese about the extent of this early kingdom, which is known the Han kingdom, which becomes Go-Joseon, the ancient Joseon kingdom. But you can see it mapped out over on the right. The green is the area where Dongi people were known to be, and the lighter color within it, then an approximation of this early kingdom. And the two themes of revering heaven and being interested in astronomy continue on. Now, there's also a female type tradition going on in Korea as well, known as the Korean shamanistic tradition. We have a couple of central figures here. Grandmother Mago is a goddess, according to this tradition, who created heaven and earth with her creative power and divine nature. She is said to have passed down her power to a shaman, a mudang, before ascending to heaven. And in Korean tradition, most of the shamans are women. The mudang are women. The other founding figure, Princess Barry, despite having been abandoned by her royal parents, king and queen, chose to go to the underworld to save them by successfully bringing back the flower of life to cure them from a life-threatening disease. That's a long story. I'm abbreviating almost everything. But she became another ancestor of the shamanistic tradition, and it shows the important role of feminine imagery, female imagery, from very early on in Korea. And that has significance for how we understand some of the later revelations that we're working with today. Also, we have very early on these ritual traditions, the worship of heaven, which is glossed in the Korean epic book as Heavenly Parent. And we know that the term Heavenly Parent was revealed by Holy Mother Han just in 2013, right before Foundation Day, but it's understood retroactively into this very early tradition, including prayers for good harvest, for peace, and to celebrate with music and dance. And we see that ritual tradition. We know that ritual is very important in Korean culture all the way down to the present. Now, this next section, I'm calling Korean religion and culture resonating with Heavenly Parent. So this is a framework that I've brought to the study of the epic. It's all the things that are in here are talked about in the epic text. But I thought a framework would be helpful for our understanding of Korean tradition. So I want to begin with cultivation, personal cultivation of heart and mind and body as one of the loci, as a locus of development in Korean cultural tradition that we can recognize as related to heaven's purposes. So these are the traditions, the religious traditions of Korean history. Shamanism, the longest, for sure, and still very active. And then around the 300s, around the beginning of the 4th century, the diagram's not quite perfect, but anyway, during this three kingdoms period, a very active period in Korean history, Korea Peninsula was divided into 3 competing kingdoms that fought each other some of the time. And then these traditions came in from China, the Confucian tradition and the Buddhist tradition, along with the high culture of China as well. And then those 2 traditions became very much part of Korean culture. They're very significant, and I'll show how that has played out. And then Christianity, with some sprinkling along the way, but especially in the beginning of the 20th century. So this is very short on these traditions. This is a whole topic in itself, but as a shorthand, Buddhism can be spoken about as the path of mindfulness. The Buddhist teachings encourage training of the heart and mind, and the heart and mind are kind of one concept together. The shim of shimjang, that word in Korean, represents what we would talk about either as heart or as mind, or both of them. The locus even of thinking is not in the brain somewhere, but in the core of your chest. Through personal discipline and ascetic practices based on compassion and wisdom, the interplay, we can say, of compassion and wisdom. And that's represented by the monks in meditation on the right. Buddhism continues to be a major religious tradition in Korea today. The Koreans celebrate both Christmas and Buddha's birthday as national holidays. Within the Buddhist tradition, we also have a forward-looking aspect in 2 forms. One is the idea that there is a pure land waiting for us, or a pure land which we can be part of. It's one of the strands of Mahayana Buddhism, relying not on our own energy and power, but instead on the power of Amida Buddha to bring us to the ideal world, perhaps after we die, or there's even some sense that it could be realized in this world. So Pure Land Buddhism, says the epic text, provided a way for the Han people to express their desire for the realization of our heavenly parents' nation. So Buddhist tradition is one of the forms in which the forward-looking trajectory congealed. And we also have Maitreya Buddha, the Buddha of the future, who is understood to be the coming Buddha, the ultimate savior, who will appear to rescue all sentient beings. And the Maitreya movement, the Maitreya imagery became important at various times in Korean history, especially in times of hardship and even chaos. And just as a free footnote, so to speak, one might wonder why the tradition is so sure that Maitreya Buddha is going to be a male. There's another possibility there. Okay, then let me shift over to the Confucian tradition, which as Dr. Walsh mentioned, I spent a fair amount of time trying to understand. In Confucianism, a sage, a songyin in Korean, shengren in Chinese, is a person who receives heaven's mandate and achieves moral or spiritual perfection. So this ideal, which has been continuous, although through many ups and downs in China, also came to Korea. Confucius is called the teacher of 10,000 generations. So in Korea, the teachings were taken very seriously. And indeed, even my Chinese Confucian master, Du Weiming, admits that the Confucian tradition reached a higher development in Korea than anywhere in China. And I'll show you that. Now, as Confucian tradition developed, one of the symbolic diagrams that appeared was this diagram of the supreme ultimate, Taeguk-do. Taeguk we have on the Korean flag. This is the ancestor, that black and white interpenetrating circle. This is surfaces around the 11th century in China. That circle is the ancestor of the Taeguk symbol that we find on the Korean flag today, and that we also use to describe the interaction of yin and yang. And the 5 elements here. Commentary in the 11th century, later accepted as the basis of Confucian metaphysics. How did the world come to be? Oh, it's right here in this diagram. In that sense, I would argue that this diagram is ancestral to so many diagrams that come into our movement in the divine principle, in unification thought, in the original principle, many diagrams that appear. So let me just say, for theological interest, the 2 top circles, the one that's empty and the one that's full, are of kind of significance, we might think. And the Confucians debated whether there were 2 separate circles in reality, or whether they were just 2 different ways of describing the same ultimate reality. In other words, we can describe ultimate reality in terms of yang and yin. Is there a God beyond God above that or not? And they debated that back and forth under this little phrase right here, wuji or taiji. There's both, they're both together, or they could be identical. That's a good question for the theologians to work on. Now, this tradition came over to Korea. So here we have a representation of a commentary on this diagram by Lee Tae-ge in the 15th century in Korea, one of the masters of Neo-Confucian philosophy altogether, and one of the most prominent figures in Korea. So here we have a slide about Lee Tae-ge is here on the left. If you've been in Korea, you know that his image is on the 1,000 won bill, 1,000 won being the most basic currency. So that's where everything starts. And the 5,000 won bill is occupied by Lee Il-guk, who is another major Neo-Confucian philosopher in the Korean tradition. So Koreans are putting not generals, not kings, but sages and philosophers on the money. That's a pretty big commitment. So to read the text on the slide, Neo-Confucian scholars Lee Tae-ge and Lee Il-guk developed sophisticated theories and practices about how emotions should be cultivated and expressed within social relationships. So the cultivation of emotion is a keynote of this tradition. So just very briefly, Confucian tradition talks about moral sentiments, human kindness, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, those 4. And it also talks about emotions that, or ordinary emotions, we might say, happiness, anger, fear, enjoyment, and so on. The question the Koreans debated was, what is the relationship between moral sentiments and ordinary emotions? Do they come from a different place in our heart and mind, or they come from the same place? For example, what about righteousness and ordinary anger? The righteous indignation, we notice, can kind of evolve toward self-righteousness, and even manifest just as ordinary fiery anger. The moral sentiments, the more you have of them, the better you are as a human being, we could say. The regular emotions need to be regulated, adjusted, cultivated. Too much of any one of them is an unbalance. So this all boils down to this character, which is Zhong. The character Zhong, as in Shim Zhong or Hyo Zhong. On the left side of the character is the marker for heart and mind, so it certainly has to do with dispositions. But what is this Zhong? Is it something we feel way deep inside of ourselves? Is it something psychological? Or does it take place in the in-between, between one person and another, between parents and children, between siblings, between friends, between even frenemies? What about that? So this is a unique development of this concept of Zhong in Korean culture that is very significant. Okay. Second, family culture and filial devotion. This one I think you're probably familiar with. Korean culture has been deeply shaped by the Confucian idea of Hyo, and then we can say Hyo-jung, which is of course a recent term, but the meaning goes back quite far. And we see that in kind of classical extended families in Korean tradition, and then the nuclear families of today, respecting and honoring parents and ancestors. That's manifested in Korean culture as well through the story of Shimcheong. I won't read the slide in the interest of time, but basically it's a story of the filiality of the daughter who's willing to sacrifice her life for the sake of her father, her blind father, so that he can recover his sight, even giving her whole life. And miraculously, she is able to survive that ordeal and return, and the father receives his sight. Similarly, the story of Chunhyang is a story of loyalty of the couple, fidelity between man and woman, husband and wife. And again, it's lifting up these core values, not only in the past, but in the present as well. The virtues of conjugal love. And one more in this set, just to say a word about Shin Sayimdang. Sayimdang is kind of a title. She was an artist. Still, her paintings, even much later, now this was the 16th century, are highly praised, but she's also an exemplary figure as a mother, as a parent, in raising her children. She's the mother of one of those Confucian philosophers that I talked about earlier. And so she's honored by her image being placed on the 50,000 won Korean bill. So if you happen to have one of those handy, you will understand who she is and why she's honored in Korean society. Third, cultural creativity and patriotic vision. Now, I think this set of three is kind of familiar for those familiar with the unification explication of Genesis 1:28. Be fruitful and multiply and have dominion. So I see this pattern through this part of the Korean epic. So here's an observatory. Remember, Korean people are interested in the heavens, in astronomy. This is one of the oldest remaining astronomical observatories in the world from the mid-7th century. So it may also have been used for ritual purposes, honoring heaven. and aligning with heaven. Another hero in the category of cultural creativity is great King Sejong, Sejong the Great. He has many merits, but one of those is creating the Hangul writing system, which many of you may be familiar with. It's quite an innovation over Chinese characters for the purpose that ordinary people would be able to learn the writing system and be able to read and write. So King Sejong developed this Hangul writing system to widely benefit his people. And we see that it's even a benefit for people around the world who want to learn Korean language today, whether to study spiritual philosophy or to follow the songs of BTS and other pop groups. So this is the science, something about the scientific nature as well as aesthetic nature of the Hangul alphabet. And here we have an artifact, this kind of ceramics, highly developed ceramics. And in this particular piece, we see that the key theme is the crane as a sacred bird of the Korean tradition, beloved also by unification members throughout the world. So here they are. Cultivation of heart, mind, and body, first blessing. Family, culture, and filial devotion, second blessing. Cultural creativity, and I'm coming to patriotic vision, third blessing. So even without the kind of direct prophetic tradition of the Hebrew tradition, this is what God says, thus saith the Lord, such and such and such. This is what you have to do. Without that, nevertheless, the people are guided in the direction of very core teaching for human life. So here's some heroes. This is Gwanggaedo the Great, the other great king. There's Sejong, and this is Gwanggaedo. Gwanggaedo lived much earlier. He's known as a hero, a kind of military hero, who took back many lands that had been invaded by others and expanded the realm, the Korean realm, in one of the three kingdoms. But he's also known as a peacemaker. I found the Korean drama about him to be very fascinating, and some of the court intrigues were very familiar to unificationists too, I might say. One reason I mentioned Gwanggaedo is that there is this stele, this huge stele in his honor set up by his son in 414, right, in the beginning of the 5th century. And this stele, praising Gwanggaedo and his abilities and his exploits, is the oldest example of writing in the Korean tradition. It's written in Chinese characters, in Chinese written system. Because after all, the Hangul written system used today wasn't invented for another 1,000 years. So Chinese was the language that had to be used. So this is the earliest artifact that we have, and it's not until 414. So earlier than that, we have to depend on archaeology, and a lot of the story is missing. Okay, then a couple of familiar heroes to many of us. Admiral Lee Sun-shin, the defender against the Japanese invasions in the 16th century, the Imjin War. If you have a chance and you like Korean movies, do get a chance to see this Myeongnyang. The English title is Roaring Currents, a hero movie about the patriotism of Admiral Lee Sun-shin, not only his prowess as a naval commander, but also his loyalty, even to a king who was ready to have him put to death. And Yu Guan-sun, heroine of independence, the 1919 independence movement against Japanese colonial rule. Then she becomes a symbol of the resistance and the aspirations for an independent country to be recovered. So She was just a high school student. She died in prison at the age of 18, but her courage and her sacrifice, resisting bravely for the sake of the independence of Korean people and the Mansei movement, is still a strong symbol in Korea today. Very quickly, Christianity enters Korea. I'll say a couple of things very quickly about that. And I want to make one particular point about the independence movement. So here we see the Korean history and the providential history of Christianity that many of us are familiar with in the West. We see where these two lines come together. The work of Martin Luther, particularly of John Calvin, becomes very fruitful on the Korean peninsula once it arrives. So Christianity arrived first in its Catholic form, and the one who brought it was a Korean himself. He had an emissary to the Ming court in China, encountered some books that had been written in Chinese for Chinese elite circles, brought them back to Korea, and were studied by a group of Korean scholars. And so Catholicism spread among laity based on that early beginning and developed. However, there was some strong opposition within the government of the period, the Joseon dynasty, and that led to persecution and eventually to martyrdom. And it's important in the whole history of Korea, not only for Christians, that there was this sacrifice of believers of the Roman Catholic Church. About half of the church, about 10,000 souls, suffered martyrdom. They didn't become apostates. They didn't run away. They accepted martyrdom. 103 of them were canonized by Pope John Paul II. Despite persecution, the church continued to grow. And there's a Protestant phase of development in Korea, on the Korean peninsula as well. So that's kind of one of the central events of that is the Pyongyang Great Revival movement in 1907. Pyongyang, which is now the capital of North Korea, was a major center of this Protestant Christian revival in waves of repentance and public confession of sins, unstoppable. Even if you weren't sure that public confession of sin was a good idea, there's nothing that could stop it from happening once it starts. So the number of people who prayed and prepared to meet the Lord of the Second Coming with devout faith increased very strongly on the Korean peninsula. And as the epic says, readying the nation to welcome the only begotten daughter and to see the day of the marriage supper of the Lamb. Mother says, although the history of Christianity in Korea was not long, the Korean Christians had made more preparations for the returning Messiah and had a deeper connection to spirit and truth than any other country in the world. So it's definitely an impressive record that we are the beneficiaries of that. I want to highlight this trio here. This is the Christian missionaries. There were missionaries coming from America and from Canada, but also from Japan, even under Japanese colonial reign. So the upper picture is Uchimuro Kanzo, a very important Christian theologian in Japanese tradition. That's a story in itself. One of his main disciples in Korea was the middle figure, Ham Sok-hun. I'll say more about him in a minute. But one of the things about him was that he was a teacher at Osan School, where Trifada Samyangmun and also Hyowan Yu studied as students. So there's a kind of lineage there from Uchimuro Kanzo through Ham Sok-hun to past President Yu. Also, the middle figure, Ham Sok-hun, is important because he was interested in a theological view of Korean history. And he eventually wrote this book, the title of which is translated as Queen of Suffering. It's a different take on Korean history than what we find in the Korean epic. It's kind of a counterpoint, a minor key. that the Koreans had much suffering, but many times, as in the biblical record, the suffering of the people was a result of failures on the part of the people. And so they were sufferings that the people ought to learn from. So it would be interesting to weave a little bit of Hamsa-kun's insight into presentations of the Korean epic. This is leadership of the independence movement. I put this because the leaders of the declarers of the Korean Declaration of Independence, there were 33 of them who joined together and declared it. And 16 of them were Christian leaders, both Methodist and Presbyterian. 13 of them were leaders of Chundogyo, which was an indigenous Korean religion, very important at that time, and 2 were Buddhists. So, word to the current Korean government, if it were not for the political involvement of religious leaders, there would have been no independence movement in Korea. Think about that. Okay, next. There's another Declaration of Independence, which was signed in, not in Korea itself, it was proclaimed in China by activists in exile. And the reason this declaration is also important is it was declared in the name of Daehan, Great Han, which became now the name of South Korea, still claiming to represent the entire country, Daehanmingun. So this declaration is also important, and it's highlighted in the epic history. So I had to do some digging around to try to understand what this document means and how it fits into the picture. Then there was the provisional government of the Republic of Korea. The figure on the left became the first president of the South regime in the South, Syngman Rhee. And I want to say a word about the figure on the right, Kim Gu, who's was a fierce freedom fighter for many years, but also a visionary. And toward the end of his life, he died in 49, you can see, he expressed his hopes for the formation of a new Korean nation, which would be a blessing and a benefit, not just to its own people, but to the whole world, that would be honored by nations around the world for its contribution to humanity. And I think this is, he even says, this is the spirit of our founder back in the day, Hongik-ingan Dan-gun. So you can see the connection from the very early to very recent. This is about the Korean War, how intense and violent it was. You may be familiar with the UN troops who came to rescue Korea and were able to successfully rescue the southern part of the peninsula. It's, of course, still divided, waiting for the day of heavenly unified Korea. Now, this section is mostly familiar, I think, to many. The only begotten daughter, the returning Messiah, and the holy wedding. So I'm going to just touch very lightly, and we can talk about it in the question and answer. The 3 generations of grandmother Joan Mo, grandmother's mother, Hong Sun-e, we call Daemonim. They participated intensely in the life of faith of the Spirit-led churches. So I put the epic beside the account that we can find in Michael Breen's book, Samnyamun, the early days, to really try to understand the movement of these Spirit-led churches and how they are related to each other and how they are related to our movement. It's interesting that in 1934, Mother's mother and Mother's father were married in the New Jesus Church by Pastor Lee Ho-bin. There's a long story about him and what's the spirituality of this church, but the interesting thing is, in the wider picture, this is 1934. So once that was solidified, even though they didn't live together much until later, because they were doing their religious work, that's the trigger for the call of the returning Messiah in 1935. So we're familiar with True Father's testimony. in so many forms, including as a peace-loving global citizen of his encounter with Jesus, or rather Jesus' encounter to him, and the intensity of that. So True Father worked to fulfill the purpose of the Second Advent, his responsibility to establish both a Christian and a national level foundation to receive the only begotten daughter and to successfully hold the marriage supper of the Lamb, as recorded in the book of Revelation. And True Mother was born in 1943. And from very, very early age, she was told and fully received the understanding that God is her father. God is her parent. We come to the holy wedding, and if we had another time, I would love to talk about the centrality of the holy wedding within the history of religion, how it relates to significant events in Christianity, in Buddhism, in Confucianism, and in Korean indigenous religions too. And that was, of course, the seed for the blessing movement, which is ongoing. We're about to celebrate another cosmic wedding blessing in Korea in just a few days. So blessing is thus the greatest imaginable grace. Now, a few words, I think I'm just about out of time, towards a heavenly unified world, the advancement of Chanilguk. This is familiar to parents' meetings with President Gorbachev and with Chairman Kim Il-sung. This is another whole story. Through the power of true love, true parents contributed mightily to ending the Cold War and widening the path toward peace. True Mother proclaimed Foundation Day after True Father Seonghwa. This was in 2013, and the advance to the firm settlement of Chanilguk in 2020, and eventually to the opening of the Chanwangong and the Chanil Sanctum just last year in 2025. The moment of the fulfillment of God's original ideal and hope from the very beginning of life together with God's as heavenly parent with son and daughter and their descendants, which indeed is all of us. Now, the task is the homeland for all humankind. The task is heavenly unified Korea based on true love. How can this be achieved? What's going to happen? How can the current situation be transformed? And we're in a nexus of transformation right now. We're in between the already of the winning the heart of Kim Il-sung, and in that sense, the heart of North Korea. That's the already accomplished and the not yet of heavenly unified Korea. And we find ourselves, I'm calling it a providential split screen. Here is True Mother proclaiming the presence of God, the sovereignty of God at the Chamwangong. And the government will be upon her shoulders, paraphrasing Isaiah chapter 9, 6, and 7. Of the increase of peace, there will be no end. At the same time, this is also the time of her incarceration. Surely she has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, paraphrasing later in Isaiah's writings. These two, it's a split screen. How can these both be true at the same time? So this is the moment when things can change very suddenly. And a sign of that is the nomination of True Mother Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon, Holy Mother Han, for the 2026 Nobel Peace Prize. She has been accepted as a nominee. Now, of course, there's a lot of choosing that goes on afterwards. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm hoping we have a lively discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Selover. Fascinating and very, very informative presentation, and learning a lot about the history of Korea, which you presented beautifully and profoundly. I was taken at the outset with your comment about developing the mythic imagination. And as you know well, that the word myth is sometimes used as a kind of a slightly pejorative term, that that's a myth as distinct from fact and truth and logic. But on the other hand, it is the mythic imagination that is often the basis of communities and nations and societies and great civilizations. It kind of inevitably becomes part of that. Even the origins of the United States that we celebrate 250 years, but certainly within the great history of Judaism and carrying forward through Christian history. So you've really done us a great service and giving us this providence of the Han people. I guess I have a quick question before I ask Henry Schaufler and Dr. Wilson, who I saw in the chat, to ask a question or make a comment. And one way of looking at the chosen Han people is kind of like our movement centered on Mother. The other is this more broader understanding of the Han people as the Korean people more generally. Is there some tension between those two at all?
Well, for sure. I think they're both profoundly true. And there's a third dimension, of course, I'll say in a minute. But we can see this is the issue on the Korean Peninsula. How does Korean culture, how does the Korean government, whether it's the present Democrat Party or the People Power Party or another party, how do they respond? That event in 1991 of true parents going to North Korea and winning the heart of Kim Il-sung is foundational. And that has been recognized by the North Koreans all along, but never by the South Korean government. They just complained, you should never do that as a private citizen. Who do you think you are? Blah, blah, blah. And so do they accept? Will that's what Mother is hoping for, I would say, in the teaching of the Korean epic in Korea, to begin to see how some of these pieces might fall together and how modern Koreans can reclaim their earlier history rather than just swimming in the virtual world of today. Third thing, of course, is in the motto, the year motto, we all, right, particularly the blessed families, but that includes all of us, to be are chosen people of Chanilguk, right, as the chosen people. So it's not just, you don't have to be Korean to be chosen. This is also something that we are very much involved in. And in that sense, like Paul taught the early Christians to claim the history of Israel also as their own, we can claim this Korean epic history also as our own. And it's important for us. This is an important new resource for thinking that's going to be with us for a while, I think.
I think so. Thank you. I'm going to turn to Henry Schaufler. I saw you first on the chat column, and then Dr. Wilson. But first, Mr. Schaufler, I think you could just speak, be unmuted and state your question. And if you can't, I'll read the question. You're currently muted, but...
Thank you very much, Dr. Selover. Very enlightening as always. So question is, do you have any thoughts about teaching this content to brand new people as a part of a Principles of Peace course in America? Like, good idea or too soon?
A very good question. I think Mother would say it's not too soon. It's never too soon in that sense. Now, how to do it, but we've been experimenting with this with some of our UPF guests in the Las Vegas area. This was pretty quick, but I can give a 10-minute version of it to set the stage for appreciating what Holy Mother Han and what our movement teaches, and True Father, of course, both of them have taught for all of their life and what they've started and what teaching is living in us. So I think, yes, it can be part of, and there are different ways to do that. And the integration and the experimentation is something that we can participate in together. So I'm interested in, how you might do that here or there. And I'd love to see some of those strategies for doing so.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Dr. Wilson. You're muted, sir.
And my mind is swimming with this beautiful presentation, very erudite, and you draw so many connections with things. It's really wonderful. I have a simple technical question.
Okay.
Heaven and heavenly parent. Is the notion of heaven in traditional Korean society a personal God? I've been wrestling with this because we're just covering Hinduism in my course and Buddhism, and there it's pretty clear that you're dealing with a more monistic philosophy and it's not really personal. And there's a kind of gap. You can paper it over with words, but when it comes to actual lived religious life, the life of a monk who is meditating on the nothingness of the diagram of the supreme ultimate is not necessarily going to come up with the God of heart.
Right. This is a very interesting question, and how that empty circle relates to the yin yang circle, and how and what source of creative reflection we might find there even.
Yeah.
Confucius, according to the Analects, to some of the passages that are handed down through the sayings, the Analects, there's more of a personal relationship with heaven, that heaven is more personified. In the even earlier text, the graph is such that it looks like a human figure with a large head, for example. The large head disappears and we just have the graphs we have today. I love to say that, that heaven is deeply connected to the core value of being human. The characters are very much related to each other. I think there's a very personalistic, we might say, if that's a word, element in Confucian spirituality, though they wouldn't go very far into trying to have private relationship with heaven. I think Confucius may have felt that, but most after the Neo-Confucian kind of logical turn, in a way, then this sense of principle, right? Where principle is a core concept for them.
Yeah.
And Jushi, just to answer that, says, well, there might be a Lord in heaven, but even if there is, the Lord in heaven must follow the principle. So you can see the shift there.
Yeah, kind of like Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, and the way that God's personality gets eclipsed by bringing in Hellenistic philosophy in Christianity.
Yep.
But we got to bring that back. We got to bring the personal God back into Korean, Confucian, and Buddhist.
Well, the thing about that, I agree with you, is that individual Koreans, individual people can be Christian depending on what kind of Christianity, but it's not exclusive. They can practice Confucian ethics in their family nevertheless. And some people can still be interested in Buddhist tradition too. So in that sense, the fervor of Christianity and the orderliness of Confucian tradition can go together, and they're both ancestral to our community. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions, please. You can either raise your hand or the chat column. While we're waiting, I just ask, I know, Dr. Selover, you were living in Korea for several years when you served as president of the university there. We hear about the secularization of Korean culture, the loss of family culture, the miserably low fertility rate in Korea, and decline of even of marriage, and the materialism. Are there signals of religious resurgence? We're hearing about in the West here that the Catholic Church in particular is enjoying some kind of revitalization, with many more young people going to church and more people signing up to become priests and nuns and members of religious orders. So I just wonder, if there are movements afoot or the spirit moving in Korea to bring Korea out of this direction that it seems to be plummeting headlong into in a very unproductive way.
Again, very good question. And I think the percentage of Christians in Korea is relatively high, certainly compared to Japan or to now mainland China. And yet, roughly half of people answering surveys will not check any box on their religion. They could be nuns, right? In the sense that they're interested maybe in spirituality. I think that's the way it has to go. That the what can I say? The less attractive parts of organized religion have maybe put a number of people off. But I think also they're wrestling with still the implications of modern Western culture. Have had tremendous implications in Korea, and there's a lot of English, for example, in spoken Korean, many English words and concepts. Koreans have worked hard to understand the West. We haven't really felt the need to, as a culture, I'm saying, to pay much attention to Korea or other Asian cultures. But actually we need to, because we can learn some things there that we seriously need to think about in our own culture. So to turn that question in a different way, the respect that international people have for Korean tradition, not only BTS and the Hallyu and K-beauty and whatnot, but for some of the treasures of Korean culture, will help to bring those back to the attention of Koreans themselves. And we see that with some of the younger people we're working with. So I'm optimistic. At the same time, there's quite a large percentage of younger Koreans are uncommitted at this point. So in a way, it's a little bit like how the United States was in the 1970s, early 70s, when the baby boomers among us, many joined the movement at that time. Why? Because there was searching for another way of thinking about spiritual life, and not just practice, but also effect on the society.
A quick word before I go to Mr. Alan Saunders, but even I read a review of a book called Korean Messiah, which is about the dynasty from Kim Il-sung and the mythic imagination that's operative there in creating cohesion and solidarity among a people. And there's something about the secularization in the West that leads to a kind of a breakup of solidarity that's
fragmentation
of the family, society, and nation. Anyway, Mr. Alan Saunders.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Walsh. Thank you, Dr. Selover. We're definitely interested in bringing you into our program in the Southeast region to do, especially with our graduates of our 12-week course that are more interested in trying to understand what we're trying to teach them in a 21-day, 40-day level. But my question kind of goes into what Dr. Walsh was talking about. Korea now has the lowest birth rate, lowest marriage rate, highest divorce rate, and highest suicide rate in the world. Also, the chaebols have a phenomenal amount of influence on especially the younger people. Chinese communists have an incredible influence on society, as do the fanatical fundamentalists, especially the Methodists and the Presbyterians. So I believe that's one reason why Mother is still in detention or coming out of it. But how do we put all that together and push Korea forward? And many of the South Korean younger people don't even want to unite with North Korea anymore. They're like, forget this. We want to take care of myself and my wife and my child, if I'm even married. So that it seems like there's a phenomenal amount of work that needs to be done inside of Korea. So what's your theory on that?
Well, along with that, I think that the way our movement is, especially in Korea, needs to evolve. It needs to evolve in the way of being more actively involved in service, for example, not just as on the side, but as a vocation, so that we discover that even though our movement has made tremendous investment in Korea, true parents speaking tours all over the place for years and years, and huge summits as well, bringing world leaders in, hasn't moved the needle in Korean general culture that much. The government has been stubbornly resisting giving any kind of recognition to the work that our movement is doing. I mean, as we see this in the court, is absolutely ridiculous. But it shows that it's when you look at it from the other way around, once the camel's nose gets into the tent, I mean, once they admit that we've been doing something good and good for Korea, then the situation can change dramatically. My understanding is some of those more familiar than I can vouch for this, that in the development of early Christianity, it really began to take off during a period of disease, when it was the Christians who were willing to take care of people who were in dire straits. And that became itself an attractive point. So that as well as our theology that we're developing, yes, but also the application of that, and in considering our theology is developing its feminine side, motherly side, then that can lead us very directly into caregiving and being the kind of people who share with others, not unique. We have plenty of conscientious people to work together with. But as we become known that way, then that's also a way of changing the atmosphere in Korea. But that means our movement needs to also transform. Reverend Ken Du has been talking about this as he goes around the country, but he's especially talking about the Korean movement too. I mean, around the world.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Selover, you've really been a blessing for all of us who've attended your presentation today, and I know your students were enriched by your course. And I can just say to our audience, Dr. Selover has a lot more to say, so be sure to look out for the next time we offer this course. We have Dean Boyd here who will be happy to enroll you in that course. In all sincerity, we are grateful to you. And I'd like to give you the last word, any kind of wrap up or about that you'd like to, thoughts you'd like to leave us with.
Sure. The Korean professors have given us Mother's Direction, this Korean epic book, but it's still very much a work in progress. And how to think about it, how to develop it, how to employ it, so to speak, is our work. It's something that we can do together. Earlier in the week, I was meeting with a group in Europe that has been studying True Parents' Thought, the Champumuran, all these things, and now we're embarking on the Korean epic, and they're discovering new things in the epic that can help us understand what Chanilguk might ideally look like. So this is our time to do this, to be part of it, to be fully involved with it, elders and youngers and everyone. And so I'm very optimistic about that, and the pathway is wide open. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Selover. Let's give him a nice round of applause. Maybe unmute yourself so your applause can be heard, the overwhelming applause. No, this was wonderful and really sparked our interest and helped us in ways that, some of us have not had time to read this book and haven't had the time we did, I remember seeing Mother's the play that she had
Yes.
about the Korean epic back in last April, a year ago. But anyway, thank you, Dr. Selover.
The play is another story, and it's also part of the epic, indeed. So
Yeah.
look forward to more iterations of this
Yes.
So we
story.
need to recover there was this Paul Ricoeur who had this term, the second naivete, that our initial venture into religion is the first naivete, and we're naively religious, and we become disillusioned. But at some point, we enter into this profoundly new second naivete that's built on a greater foundation of maturity or something. So let's pray that
the re-enchantment of the world, and you
There
can
you
find
go.
that happening many places, among them Chanchimwa.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.